She's a real woman with a real life. She's someone you can relate to. Dawn Newton.
Hey, welcome to the Dawn Newton Podcast. I am your host, Dawn Newton. By any chance, are you familiar with the Blue Zones? How about Dan Buettner, the founder of the Blue Zones organization? Have you watched the 4-part docu-series on Netflix, Live to 100, Secrets of the Blue Zones? Well, I've interviewed Dan Buettner a couple times, once in 2017 and again in 2019. And I'm going to replay for you the interview I did in 2017. When I first interviewed him, got familiar with the Blue Zones and Dan and heard the story and what this was all about. And it's incredibly inspiring. And then, of course, watching the docuseries really drove it home for me to the point that I wanted to talk about it on my podcast and introduce you to Dan Buettner and the Blue Zones and what this is all about. So essentially, the Blue Zones are areas, there's 5 areas that Dan focuses on in the series, is where more people are living significantly longer than average. These areas are in Japan, Greece, Italy, Costa Rica, and Loma Linda, California. And there's other areas throughout the world and in the United States that would be designated as blue zones. But these ones had the highest rate of living centenarians. And these individuals, they tell us their story. We get to hear from them, get to meet them, what the secrets are. And one thing that you're going to notice is that what we think leads to a long, healthy life is misguided or just plain wrong. And this is what Dan says. He says diet plans, gym memberships, and expensive supplements, they're noticeably absent from the Blue Zone lifestyles. Just makes you kind of rethink how we live our lives day to day and what do we want it to look like as we age, as we get into our later years? What do we want our longevity to be like? You know, we always go for the short-term fix, for the reunion, the vacation, the wedding, the whatever. But what about the long haul? This really gives you something to think about. So like I said, I want to play this interview from 2017, an introduction to Dan Buettner and the Blue Zone. And once that's done, I've got a couple personal comments I'd like to make to close out today's podcast.
It's pretty amazing, this work that you do. The Blue Zone solution is eating and living like the world's healthiest people. Dan Buettner, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you. Tell us about the Blue Zone.
It was a project by National Geographic that set out to reverse engineer longevity. So because only about 20% of how long we live is dictated by our genes, the other 80% is up to us, we hired demographers to do a very careful study to find pockets where people either have the highest life expectancy or the highest concentration of centenarians. And then we sent a second wave of scientists in to look at what the characteristics of these populations are. What are the common denominators that explain longevity? And then in the Blue Zone solution, the idea was to create a manual, more or less, easy-to-use manuals for Americans to take those lessons and put them to work in their own lives.
And you did a lot of traveling with this, too. You've kind of been all over the world. What attracted you to this to begin with?
Well, in the decade before starting Blue Zone's work in the early 2000s, I led scientific expeditions to unravel ancient mysteries. And in 2000, I found a study from the World Health Organization that showed Okinawa had the longest disability-free life expectancy in the world, the longest lived, healthiest people in the world. And I said, aha, now that's a good mystery, and people will care about that. And I was right.
One thing that I was reading that was really interesting is how, it says in here in the start of our talking points, a long, healthy life is no accident. It begins with good genes. How do we know how good our genes are?
Well, I want to emphasize that genes, so for 80% of us, genes don't make that big of a difference. There's a few people who've been dealt a bad hand, and they can do everything right, and they'll be dead at 50 because of some genetic disease. That's a small portion. And there's a few people who can, drink whiskey and smoke cigarettes and make it to 100. That's under 1% of people. But for most of us, genes are not that important in driving how long we live. It's how we set up our life that's the real important thing. The thing is, I can tell you the exact right things to do, the exact diet, the exact physical activity regimen, but when we try to change our behaviors, it's occasionally a short-term success and always a long-term failure. And when you have places around the world where people make it to 100, it's not because at age 50 they decided to change their diet. They just lived in the right environment. And the secret is identifying the right environment for our families to live. And if we don't live in that healthy environment, to begin to shape our environment so the healthy choices are the default. They're mindless.
Well, and how do we determine those right environments?
The CDC Gallup both published the life expectancy of different communities. Like there are communities in Kentucky where the life expectancy is 20 years less than in, say, Boulder, Colorado. So by just moving to a place like Boulder or Minneapolis, Minnesota, or San Luis Obispo, where life expectancy is higher, you get to share in that better environment. You're more likely to eat fruits and vegetables. You're more likely to walk places than drive your car. You're more likely to not be exposed to air pollution. You're more likely to socialize in the right way. And the big point I make in Blue Zones is don't try to change your individual behavior. Shape your surroundings, and that will work for the long run.
So it sounds like it's mostly the surroundings, the communities that are less urban. Bend, Oregon, I would say, would probably fit that. Tons of outdoors, lots of mountains, kind of all of Oregon, in essence, kind of fits that. Is that a right assumption?
Yes. In fact, we're working with the Blue Cross Blue Shield plan, their regents, in Klamath Falls, Oregon, and for the past 2 years, they've took it upon themselves to reshape their environment. They've changed food policies to favor healthy foods. They've redesigned their streets to make them more walkable and bikeable. They've created Blue Zone certified restaurants, grocery stores, and schools. So a comprehensive Blue Zone effort to change environment. And already we're seeing obesity rates drop, smoking rates drop, and people are reporting greater life satisfaction. So it can work in America, and indeed right in Oregon.
And talk about, too, some of these superfoods, because I know I'm sure our listeners are wondering, well, what do we eat? Because we always want to go straight to the points of what can we change? So
Blue Zone solution, part of it was to look at what 100-year-olds ate their whole lives. So 155 studies done in all 5 Blue Zones areas over the last 100 years. And the 4 foods that float to the top on all of them, number 1, greens. Number 2, grains. This is rice and whole wheat. Blue Zone diet is very high in complex carbohydrates. Number 3, they snack on nuts. If you're eating a handful of nuts a day, it's probably worth about 2 years of extra life expectancy. And number 4, the cornerstone of every longevity diet in the world is beans. They're eating about a cup of beans a day, and they know how to make those beans taste good. So they're eating them constantly, and it's adding probably 3 to 4 years to their life expectancy.
Those are things that we have readily accessible to us. Doesn't seem like there's any type of secret to this longevity. Tell us about the book. Who is this book for? Is this for anybody at any time of life?
Yeah, you can make changes at any age, and it'll make a difference. And it'll make you feel better today, and it'll add years to your life expectancy in the long run. But I think people are most interested are people over 25 who maybe saw their first wrinkle, or they woke up in the morning, they felt the pain, and they really want to delay that for as long as possible and stay biologically younger. And people who might have tried diets and exercise programs and have been disappointed, this offers a different evidence-based approach and shows you how to set up your surroundings for the long run.
And Dan, you've been doing this for quite a while as a National Geographic Fellow and founder of the Blue Zone. What does this work mean to you?
Well, I've always been a big believer that traditional societies in the world that have been around for centuries or millennia have important lessons to teach us. And I'm delighted to see that you can take secrets from places like Sardinia and Okinawa and apply them in places like Klamath Falls and Fort Worth, Texas, and Naples, Florida, and see at a population level obesity rates dropping, and see these secrets put to work in America and making fellow Americans healthier. It's a great satisfaction to me.
Where can we learn more about you, and where can we find this book?
Well, Blue Zone Solutions on Amazon, but at bluezones.com, we have a summation of the book. We also have a free calculator done by the University of Minnesota that'll calculate how long you live, true vitality test. And then I have a great team of experts who are always tweeting and posting on Facebook, and that, again, is at Blue Zones, both of those mediums and Instagram. So I'd love to meet you there.
Dan Buettner, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I appreciate your time.
I love talking to you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Again, that was Dan Buettner, founder of the Blue Zones organization. And as Dan says, you don't need to move to a Blue Zones to live to 100. You can create your own Blue Zones right where you are. You can start living your own Blue Zone today. On a personal note, in August of this year, I had surgery to repair a bulging disc in my low back. It was that L5-S1 situation, a very common surgery, but But while you're waiting for surgery and you're dealing with this bulging disc situation, it has you down, it knocks you down, and it's pretty painful. So my summer kind of sucked, and anything active came to a halt, which was incredibly frustrating and I would say even depressing. But it also, gave me a renewed appreciation for my health, for being active, and couldn't wait to get back. So I was really looking forward to once I had the surgery and being on the other side of it, which is where I am right now. But when you don't have your health, it certainly does a number on you. It was during my post-surgery downtime that I found the Live to 100 Secrets of the Blue Zones on Netflix. And I watched all 4 episodes of the docu-series in one sitting. You get to meet the centenarians that Dan talks about. You get to hear their stories in their own words. You watch their day-to-day habits, and watching how active and sharp that they are in their late 90s and early 100s was pretty amazing and incredibly inspiring, but also humbling, because here's me in my late 50s and I'm looking at these people in their late 90s and 100s who are way more active and agile and flexible than I am right now. So it's like, ooh, I got some work to do. But, Live to 100 makes you reflect on your own life. You can't help it. How does my life compare to those of the Blue Zones? And what can I change? What can I do differently to improve my health and my day-to-day living? And that's not meant to be thought of or said in a judgmental or negative way. It's never too late, and we can always improve. We know where we can do better. We can, do better in our eating and our activity, and, even in the people that we choose to surround ourselves with, the environment. Are you surrounded by positive, encouraging, and healthy people and environments that encourage you and lift you up? If not, maybe it's something to think about. Think about making some changes in your life. If you knew you were going to live into your 90s and beyond, what do you want that to look like? So I would encourage you to be curious about yourself, be curious about your lifestyle, your habits, but in a healthy, positive way, not in a negative way. Don't beat yourself up. That's not at all what this is about. And again, if you could live to 100, what would you want that to look like? I mean, even if you hit your 70s, your 80s, your 90s, what do you want that to look like? Be curious about the Blue Zones. Be curious about Dan Buettner and his team. They've done such an excellent job exploring the science and lifestyles behind longevity. For all things Blue Zones, check out bluezones.com. And if you have access to Netflix, I can't recommend Live to 100 Secrets of the Blue Zones enough. And you can also find their books on their website, bluezones.com, wherever books are sold. And I'm sure you could probably find them at your local library. You can also follow Dan Buettner on Instagram at Dan Buettner. I guarantee you it will be time well spent. You won't regret a minute of it. And be sure and check out my website, dawnnewton.com.
The Dawn Newton podcast is written, produced, and hosted by Dawn Newton.